So back to the battles of the war. Took a break for some politics and stuff like that from our last video. But back to three major battles that took place in 1863. I do want to remind you that there are hundreds and hundreds of battles of the Civil War. So the ones that we learn about, we're only going to learn about, I think, 7 or 8 of them. I can't remember the number. But just know that these aren't the only ones by any stretch of the imagination. There are hundreds of them. It's just these are the ones that are the most significant, I feel, that you know. So, Battle of Chancellorsville happened in Virginia. A lot of battles happened in Virginia. For several reasons. Of course, remember the Confederate capital is in Virginia, so there's still that effort that the Union Army wants to eventually capture Richmond. It's also the northernmost of the Confederate states. So, it makes sense that if the North is trying to capture places in the South, it's going to capture around the perimeter of the South, which includes Virginia and Tennessee and kind of around. And you'll see a map later on that shows that. So anyway, Battle of Chancellorsville was significant not because of the battle itself per se. It was a Confederate victory at this battle. The significant thing that happened actually happened afterwards, which is that, well, during the battle, Stonewall Jackson, who was a Confederate general, remember, and kind of Robert E. Lee's right-hand man, and he was at this battle along with Lee. And during the battle, he was accidentally shot by one of his own men. And they mistook him as a Union officer and shot him. And he didn't die immediately. He was shot in the arm. But after the battle, as they were trying to treat his wounds, they were unable to save his arm. They had to amputate his arm, and then during the recuperation process, pneumonia set in. And that's actually how he died. He died of pneumonia after the amputation, after the friendly fire incident. So this was a really significant blow to the Confederacy to lose one of their top leaders. Here's Jackson, a depiction of him in his deathbed. He said, "My religious belief teaches me to feel as safe in battle as in bed. God has fixed the time for my death. I do not concern myself about that, but to always be ready no matter when it may overtake me." Robert E. Lee, when he got word that Jackson had been shot and was on the verge of death, he sent a note back that said, "Give General Jackson my affectionate regards, and I say to him, he has lost his left arm, but I my right," which means he was referring to Jackson as his right arm, which is his most important person in the war with him. So the Battle of Chancellorsville is significant mostly because of the death of Stonewall Jackson, even though it was a Confederate victory. So moving on to what is pretty much the most important battle of the war, is the bloodiest battle of the war, and it will be the turning point of the war. So it's a 3-day battle taking place in Pennsylvania. So it's really significant to understand where this battle is. If you look at the map on the screen there, there's the star there that shows Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Notice where this is in relation to where most of the rest of the war has taken place. This is the northernmost battle of the war. We're in Pennsylvania now, which is a definitively Union state, not even a border state. This is Robert E. Lee continuing into Union territory, again, trying to score some victories to try to end the war sooner. His other generals had been advising him that maybe he should head back and maybe stay on the defensive. But I really think that Robert E. Lee, to some extent, maybe was guilty of, having a bit too much confidence, maybe believing that, he could win this, he could do this. And so he pressed ahead up to Gettysburg. The actual battle happening there turned out to be kind of an accident. Lee was actually up in Gettysburg trying to get shoes for his men. There was a shoe factory there in town. And he had sent Jeb Stuart, his scout, ahead of him to try to find out the location of the Union troops. But Jeb Stuart was off kind of having fun, joyriding all around, and was not really doing his job. And so when Lee had his men in Gettysburg trying to get those shoes, turned out that the Union Army happened to be right there in his presence. Needless to say, probably wasn't too happy with Jeb Stuart when he saw him later. So the two armies converged on a field just outside of town in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. So it's going to last for 3 days. And just we'll kind of do this in a nutshell. Days 1 and 2 was basically about a lot of maneuvering and positioning to try to get the best positions, particularly on top of hills. We've talked about this before, but if your men are positioned on top of a hill, you have a greater advantage for several reasons. You have a vantage point, you can see farther. It's also easier fighting down than it is to try to fight up the hill. And so the first 2 days of the war was a lot of fighting, trying to see which side could have the best positioning on the various hills in the area, particularly Cemetery Ridge and Little Round Top. So those are a couple of the mini battles within the Battle of Gettysburg. So those took place on the first 2 days. And the Union was able to establish position on what's called the high ground, managed to capture the high ground and be in those positions. Well, there was a lot of talk among the leadership of the Confederates there, Lee and his men there, particularly James Longstreet was his second in command there. And Longstreet was trying to talk Lee out of continuing this battle, tell him they just need to retreat, that this isn't working, go back, stay on the defensive. But Lee insisted on continuing this, that day 3 that we'll be able to take them and take back over the position there and defeat them. So he kind of ignored the people who were telling him that he should just call this battle quits. And he continued. And so what he did was he basically assigned on day 3. There was a man who had felt that he had he actually got to Gettysburg later in this battle. He missed the first 2 days, and he showed up on the evening of the second day with his men, and his name was General Pickett. And he felt that he had missed all of the excitement. He talked to Lee, and he was like, "Hey, I can't believe I've missed all the fun." He probably didn't use that word, but he felt that he kind of missed the action. And Lee said, "But you know what? I've got a job for you. Here's what I want you to do." So basically, here's what happens. You've got the Northern Army. I don't know if you can see me here. Attempt to kind of show you this. Northern Army are established up on the top of this hill. And what Robert E. Lee is expecting them to do is to fortify the ends of the line to prepare for what's called a flank. So Robert E. Lee thinks that, I'm trying to get in the center of the picture, thinks that the Union Army is going to be the strongest on the ends. So he orders Pickett to send his men straight up the middle, thinking that that will be the weak part of the line. Little does he know that the Union troops that are on this hill, they actually, their leaders decided to take some of the men from the ends and reinforce the middle. So what basically happens is Pickett and his men going up the middle, expecting that to be the weak part, it ended up being that was the strongest part of the Union line. And so Pickett's charge, which is what it's called, was a massive failure. It lasted about an hour, And you'll see on the next slide how many casualties happened in that hour. 50 minutes, 5,600 people killed. 50 minutes, 5,600 people, 3,000 from Pickett's specific division alone. He wrote back to Lee saying, "General Lee, I have no division." So this was a monumental failure. Pickett's charge did not work. And Robert E. Lee, after this battle was over, really kind of took the defeat hard, believed that it was his fault that this had happened, that maybe he should have listened and he never should have done that. As we see here, Robert E. Lee, all of this has been my fault. He was reportedly just speaking this line kind of over and over, stumbling back over to his men, taking full responsibility for that. The significance of the Battle of Gettysburg was that it was the turning point. I'm sorry, I moved ahead on the slide, but so bear with me for a second. It was a turning point of the war. It was the farthest north that the South ever got, because after Gettysburg, they are going to be retreating all the way to the end of the war. So this is the turning point. They had been moving north, trying to invade into Union territory. This was the big failure, the big loss for them. And so they are now going to be turned around, heading back to the South. It's also the bloodiest battle of the war in total. I can't remember if it said how many, it doesn't say how many people were lost. Over 50,000. I have more of this on an assignment that I may try to make available for you. You can check the website for the Gettysburg assignment, and I'll see if I can get that up. But you can see kind of the breakdown of how many casualties, how many deaths, how many wounded, etc. So going through the guided notes that academic students have, July 1st through 3rd, 1863, the Battle of Gettysburg took place in Pennsylvania, which is significant because it's in the north. The South strategy has changed because they have invaded into Union territory, not just staying on the defensive. The Confederate general is Lee, and the right-hand man is James Longstreet. Days 1 and 2, the Union troops control the high ground, is what that's called, Cemetery Ridge and Little Round Top. It's the higher areas of the field, so it's the high ground. The third day failed Confederate attempt was Pickett's charge. And feel free to rewind if you need to and go back and see how different things are spelled, and you can find this earlier in the video. The significance, it was the turning point of the war, the farthest north the South would get, as well as the bloodiest battle of the war. So I am going to pause there and pick up with another battle that was actually happening at the same time as Gettysburg. Gettysburg concluded on July 3rd, 1863. On the other side of the country, down in Mississippi, there is a major battle also coming to conclusion on July 3rd, 1863. And spoiler alert, it's going to be another massive, massive loss for the Confederates. They're going to lose both the Battle of Gettysburg and the Battle of Vicksburg on the same day, and you'll see more of that on the next video.